We've looked at a number of different ways of exfiltrating data throughout this course already. So we've looked at things like a union-based injection, where we pump the data out to the web page, an error-based injection, where we get the data by way of an internal exception, and then of course the blind injection attacks, where we have to actually make assumptions about the data by asking questions. In this module, we've looked at simply connecting direct to the database and pumping that data back out to an external client. Another approach we can use here is the OPENROWSET command. And this is something that we can always execute remotely via a SQL injection risk in the web app. Now, OPENROWSET is pretty powerful stuff, and I want to show you what it does here. Now, in this case, we're going to use 3 different parameters on the function. The first one is just simply a provider name, and we're using the OLEDB provider for SQL. The second one is the data source. Now, this is the data source that we are going to exfiltrate our data to. So this would be your database as an attacker, and you simply need a connection string here that the database you're attacking can use to connect to. So it has to be able to connect out, and your database has to allow it to connect in. Now, in this case, my target server is Troy PC. It's my PC, but it could be any machine anywhere on the internet that the server we're running this against can connect to. I'm giving it a target database. So in this case, it's my hacker database, and a username and a password, hacker login, and the word password. The third parameter here is a query against the database that we actually want to export the data to. Now, the query is going to be executed by the provider, and it needs to be a query against our database as the attacker, so the one we want to exfiltrate data into. Now, I've created a table called city_hacked in my database, the one called hacker database. And what we're going to do is insert into this OPENROWSET from the query, which is simply select name from city. So all things going well, if we can remotely execute this command against a vulnerable app, it's going to take all the data out of the city table and transfer it into my database as an attacker into a table called city_hacked. I'm doing it here in SSMS because it's a little bit easier to demo. But let's now run this and see what happens. So we actually have an error. SQL Server blocked access to the statement OPENROWSET or Open Data Source. Now, I wanted to show you what happens here because often OPENROWSET is used as an example of a SQL injection attack. But equally often, you won't see it explained that by default, SQL Server will block this. Because from SQL Server 2005 onwards, this is secure by default. You simply cannot run OPENROWSET. And when you consider the power of this command, that makes a lot of sense. So this is a good thing to have turned off. So what I'm going to do is turn this back on. And I've got the command on my clipboard. It simply looks like this. We're going to run sp_configure. We want to change ad hoc distributed queries and turn it on. So let's select and then run this statement now. So that should enable it. And now let's select and run the OPENROWSET command. And this time it's executed successfully. 5 rows have been affected. So let's now take a new query and we're going to jump over to that hacker database and have a look inside that table. So let's use hacker database and let's select star from that table. And here are our results. They've been pumped out into my hacker database simply by using OPENROWSET. But again, I want to reiterate, you cannot do this by default in any modern version of SQL Server. So anything from 2005 onwards. And arguably 2005 is no longer even modern. So when you see this example from SQL injection, it's really only the very, very old versions that it will work on by default. Now, of course, if you have enough privileges on the database, so the web app is connecting with a privileged account, you can always run sp_configure yourself. So as an attacker, you can execute that remotely against the database via an injection risk in the web app, and then you can run the OPENROWSET command. So getting around it is not necessarily a very hard thing to do. Let's now move on and take this even further by starting to actually execute commands on the operating system of the database server.